So, good. On the day before World Toilet Day 2024, that we can meet and exchange a bit, reflect on sanitation. That's what the World Toilet Day is for. And it's a more or less spontaneous idea on discussions we had during the last few weeks, that why not have sort of an open reflection on what we saw in our sanitation lives and what came out of it, and how do we see the sector going on. And I'm happy that we're doing that, and hope that we'll have an interesting discussion for ourselves and maybe as well for others. We'll first have a round of sort of the organizers, so to speak, and then we'll open it up to those who have joined us today. Sunitra, would you like to add a few words for sort of the opening part of things?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Arnie, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. We felt a couple of weeks ago that this is an apt opportunity, with World Toilet Day tomorrow to reflect on, the sanitation journey of India, where we started, where we've come, and what we've seen along the way. Some good, some not so good, and so on and so forth. So this is really a reflection of what we've seen, some of the challenges that lie ahead, and what needs to be done to address those challenges. As Bettina pointed out, this meeting is being recorded, so you can choose to turn off the camera and microphone, or leave the meeting in case you don't consent to the recording or its use, which will be hosted in the Susanna website. We will start the reflections with 5 minutes each for some of us who have joined here, and then it'll be an open discussion. If you wish to speak, please share your name and let us know that you would like to contribute to the discussion, and then we will connect with you as well. With that, I think we'll kick off with Dipinder, if that's all right with you, Dipinder, to start with this process and discussion on our journey, our sanitation journey. Over to you, Dipinder.
Yeah, thanks, Sunitra. And I think the value of this conversation kind of engagement is that we all share some of our ideas and our interpretations of the sanitation journey of India, and then open it up for any discussion and reflection. So it is meant to be a conversation, and therefore in that spirit I'll just share in 5 minutes what I have experienced or learned. And so I actually migrated from watershed development to water and sanitation in 2003 when I joined WaterAid. Before that, water sanitation was there, but it was seen as a very specialized niche role. And I was also a little surprised that when I joined water and sanitation approaches, it was very much about infrastructure, frankly. At that time, it was about toilets and hand pumps. And it remained that how many toilets, how many hand pumps, and then hygiene got added, then menstrual hygiene came in. So things moved in that direction. And at the same time, I observed that at the central government level, the focus was very much on rural sanitation that time. And I'm sure Nitya and Sunitra will explain. They've written a book about the last 10 years in which they focused on Swacch Bharat Mission and before that. But it was a very strange trajectory there. And in WaterAid, I also realized that in 1981, 1% of the rural sanitation, coverage was 1% in India, rural sanitation coverage. And in 2013, it was 31% when Swacch Bharat Mission started in 2014. So it was on an average 1% rural sanitation coverage we were achieving in a year. And it also exposed to me the kind of approaches which were followed from low subsidy, no subsidy, high subsidy. And, we are familiar with those trajectory of Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan, Total Sanitation Campaign, and SPM, how this subsidy approach changed. And In terms of approaches, also, this was a time, a lot of new approaches in the last 20 years, I would say, starting in 1998 with Ludwig Sasse's book on loamwatts, which became DWATS after that. And ecological sanitation, which Eklavya, I'm sure, will speak on, and how these approaches then, from there it became centralized versus decentralized systems. Now we're talking of climate and water sensitive urban design planning and all that. So different approaches, if you see, have emerged. And I'm sure a lot of young people would get terribly confused, why, what, where. So this conversation, I thought it was important that way to bring on board in one time, this kind of a background. And perhaps in the next exchange, when we have a discussion on, what and why, then I can come in more. Only thing is that I did find the sector becoming techno-managerial. So that was my critique of the water and sanitation sector. Quite techno-managerial, and somewhere that issue of equity and justice, of addressing challenges, because what we did in watershed management was not a techno-managerial watershed management. It was always linked to common lands as the last recourse of the poor. That was the basis of doing watershed development, not watershed development for the sake of good structures, micro watershed, and all that. So I did find that in the water sanitation sector, this link between equity and justice, why we are doing what we are doing, a lack of a critical thinking. This is what KJ Joy also highlighted in one of when we asked him to write about it. So I think these were some of my 5-minute kind of sharing. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So on the list, Eklavya would be next to sort of to react, but I would maybe in between, as you were saying in the preparatory, sort of, can I give sort of the bigger picture? I will share my my 5 cents on that one. I came from the biology, limnology side, and at the Swiss Water Research Institute, there was a holistic project on urban wastewater management and how that impacts sort of the city impacts sort of the brooks and rivers around Zurich. And that was the time of reunification in Germany. And as a student, we were thinking, okay, in the eastern part of Germany, the number of houses and small villages which are not connected to a sewer, and that the German law actually requires every household to be connected to the sewer. But this would be very heavy costs for some of the households and small villages. And we were sort of, as students, fighting for that they should, if they manage to treat the wastewater, the gray water, the excreta, everything well, then they should not be forced by law to connect to a sewer that is far away. So that's actually how I came into the sector. And then sort of we were looking at the Swedish program, and they have so many. They have their summer house somewhere in the forest, and definitely there is no sewer nearby. And they have a good experience how you can have a toilet without water, which is a decent, wonderful toilet. And they don't think it's their summer house. It's where they do their holidays. There's no problem. So that brought the Swedish Ecosan RES program, and in parallel, the German ministry made the Ecosan program. And with my NGO background, I was sort of drawn into the German part of the program, and what was initially thought for Germany and for parts of Germany that decentralized sanitation should be allowed. Sort of the idea came, well, what's that question on a global level? And so the whole idea of reuse-oriented sanitation, Ecosan, came about. And well, we then it sort of Prakash and others, and Vishwanath and Dayanand and the Ecosan Service Foundation and Shantashila Nair. And there was, in the early 2000s, there were quite some efforts. Can sort of urine diverting toilet be a solution, and can they be accepted, and can they be managed, and is that something as well for India? And well, we learned that it's not that easy. And well, I don't know how that went on, but it wasn't sort of the solution for everything and everybody. I never thought it would be, but that was a period where that was quite prominent, and from there it went on that the topic of closing the loop on wastewater, on nutrients and everything, with the idea of phosphorus as a limited resource, became more acceptable in the discourse, but I don't think it really changed anything on what's happening on the ground there. Sort of then maybe the different policies in India had a much larger impact than the idea of Ecosan somewhere in the corner. And I think that's where I can hand it over back to Eklavya to continue. What's your journey, Ek?
Thank you, Arnie. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my lived experience as far as sanitation is concerned. So for me, my initial decade of my career, I was largely working in the western part of the country, which is Rajasthan. And thereafter, I was working with the Center for Science and Environment, and the entire area was spread across the country. However, it was in 2005 that I got the opportunity to go and initiate work in Bihar, and that too in North Bihar, the flood-prone areas. And after moving around in that area for 1.5 years to figure out what exactly I would like to do, the issue of drinking water came in, and we were focusing specifically during floods as to what measures can be taken by people themselves so that they have access to safe drinking water. And that was the time when we came up with the whole concept of temporary rainwater harvesting during floods, so that people could have their temporary catchment, temporary storage, and they would not have to depend on anyone for fresh water, because at that point of time, you hardly had access to water. So thereafter, when we went back to the community to assess the work that we were doing, one of the things that came in from people was that you should not only limit yourself to work on water during the floods, because there are problems with regard to water, even pre-floods and post-floods. And that is when we started interacting more with the fact that groundwater was the main source for water in that part of the country. So when we did the water testing, we had different contaminants, and iron was there, arsenic was there, and E. coli was there. And at that point of time, we figured out that we could do. There were measures, like for instance, we started revival of dug wells for arsenic affected areas. We had filters for arsenic affected areas, and also for iron. But we were stuck in terms of what do we do as far as E. coli is concerned. What are the measures that we need to take? And that is when Vishwanath, told us about the Ecosan. Now, we were not sure because at that point of time, the local partners with whom we were working, they were not exposed to this concept at all. So it took us a while. There was a lot of hand-holding, and from Biome also. And at that point of time, what happened was that we realized that our work, we cannot replicate the exact model which was being used in South India. There has to be some difference. So we started off with a mobile kind of a technology, and then we started innovating our structures. And at that point of time, definitely this whole concept of dry toilet was a big issue and was not being accepted easily. But we continued, though we had more of failures than success. But what was interesting was wherever we had success, it was basically the interest of people which was kicking in, and their whole resolve to have access to sanitation when it is required the most, in the sense when the environment is hostile, when there are floods. And this is what was the driving force for us. And at that point of time, even to talk about the connection between groundwater, excreta, E. coli, and impact on health was something very alien, because at that point of time, it was just water, hand pumps, and it was sanitation was seen in isolation. So for us to bring those all together was definitely problematic. And then what happened was, when we were involved in a lot of reviews of the existing sanitation systems, and when we went around the entire North Bihar region to understand what was happening, we realized that that point of time, that was a single pit toilets. Now, the single pit toilets, you could make out that, it was not the technology which was to be promoted. Now, these insights also gave us a lot of ideas in terms of what should we pursue, howsoever difficult it was. Now, as SBMG was unfolding, with a past experience, we started saying that, in the entire Gangetic floodplains, twin leach pit is not going to help, because of the fact that, one, it gets inundated, second, it gets destroyed, and third, it becomes the infrastructure or the service is inaccessible when it is required the most. So in places where there are floods, and then we also overlaid it with the typologies of floods which we had identified in North Bihar. And there are, at the moment, we have identified almost 8 typologies. Now, based on the typologies, the impact on sanitation services are very different. So we had to, even reconstruct our own thinking in terms of how do we deal with the Ecosan, which we call it as Faidaman Shauchalaya. The direct translation is beneficial toilet. So we started talking about sanitation being very specific to typologies: flash floods, waterlogged areas, riverine floods, floods which happen because of the breach of embankment. So we started bringing in the complexities. As of today, earlier we used to have 2 categories of households in the villages. One, which was households with toilets; second, households without toilet. Now what has happened, the scenario is complex. So you have households, in a village you have households that have toilets but are not functional. There are toilets which are destroyed. There are toilets which are partly functional during dry season. There are toilets which are functional during the floods and post floods, throughout the year. So this is a kind of a complexity that has come up. Now, in terms of the intent, I'll end soon. I think so. I have to give 500 to Bishwanath. So the fact that this complexity is there, it is important that we recognize it. And we have been experimenting with one village in West Champaran district. We started the Ecosan in 2017, 2018. There were almost about 8 units that we made. Then we stopped. And this is a riverine flood-prone area just next to River Gandak. And we stopped because of the fact that we wanted to know whether it's our figment of imagination, or is it so that actually people are using it when it's required the most, is during floods. And then we did an assessment. And then we again had another, so during from 2016 to 2017 to 2024, the structure actually had encountered at least 6 major floods, out of which 2020 was the worst. Now, people at that point of time, especially women and adolescent girls, they had the option of not coming onto the embankment. They were staying in their place just because of the fact that they had access to toilet. And because once we were comfortable that we have we have proven a point, we went ahead with the second batch of constructing the second set of toilets. Now the point is, the difference happened when we changed focus from interacting with men and getting the toilets done, compared to interacting with women and getting the toilets done. Men normally migrate, so for them there is a full stop in terms of the construction, whereas women are the ones who are there in the village, and they're quite persuasive. So I'll end here saying that, just with one line, that alternatives need to be identified, especially for all these areas. And it's just not Bihar, it's Eastern UP, it's North Bihar, it's Bengal, it's Assam. So there's a huge population, and unless and until we concentrate on alternatives, we will keep talking about toilets being retrofitted, and then again the retrofitted would be retrofitted again. So the cycle continues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm happy to hear just before World Toilet Day of another project I wasn't aware of. And as well, the idea sort of that during floods, actually, that could be a solution, or could be the desired place if you have an UDTT. You as well said about that you went towards containers, and I think looking over the last 20, 30 years, sort of what has come up is the container-based sanitation, let's say, movement, which is one of the things I have hope that this might develop further. Next one would be Nitya. You have, together with Sunitra, written a book on a memoir of two toilet inspectors. Maybe you can guide us a bit on your book, or what has it done with you, and how you look at what happened in the last years. And Nitya, over to you.
Thanks, Arne, and great to be here. So I'll just step back and maybe go over my sanitation journey a little bit, and then come to the book a little later. So the first time I encountered sanitation was as a consultant. I'd been working on water-related issues, and I was looking for consultancy work. So I was hired during the total sanitation campaign days, and that was about the time when the Nirmal Gram Puraskars were the kind of hot button topic. And they were being given out to villagers that had eliminated open defecation. I think this was sometime in 2007. And I was sent off to villages in states. And I had no idea what sanitation, and that India even had a sanitation mission. So I was sent off to learn and see what's going on and write up my impressions. I traveled to several villages and tried to understand what this total sanitation campaign was about and what this Nirmal Gram Puraskar was about. It was very interesting to learn that there was indeed a sanitation program, and people in villages did not have toilets. It was a kind of a revelation. So where do they go? And also it was interesting to see how such a large government program was being run at the grassroots. And then I got a little deeper into it. I looked at how sanitation was affecting, these sanitation missions were affecting manual scavenging, and what are the social mores around defecation, and what are the norms governing the use of toilets and things like that. So sanitation sort of appeared like an onion to me. You peel off one layer and then you think you reach the core of the problem. No, but then you see another layer and you keep going and you keep going, and until you get to the core of the problem. But then I think the core of the problem also is the core of the issue rather, is very different from place to place. And I found that each successive mission was like a layer of the onion. So there was a total sanitation campaign, Nirmal Bharat, then the Swacch Bharat 1 and Swacch Bharat 2, and I don't know if there's anything right now. And then the definitions and the activities kept changing. I mean, the underlying concepts are the same, but the definitions and the overlying definitions and approaches and all of that kept changing. So we had Nirmal Gaons, we had Swachh Gaons, we have model villages, aspiring villages, ODF villages, ODF plus, ODF plus plus, and so on and so forth. And then we had armies of village motivators. Then we had Swachhagrahis. And then they were paid, and then they were unpaid. And then at the Delhi, at the national level, of course, there was the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation under the Ministry of Rural Development. That became a ministry. And then again, it's become a department, but it's been shifted to the Water Resources Ministry. So I found that a lot of things remain the same. The concepts have remained the same, but nomenclature has changed. And by and large, even the approaches have remained the same. I think that is one of the kind of issues with sanitation. So I'll come back to that. So anyway, when I was looking at this 10-year kind of a gap between my first set of travels and a subsequent set of travels in 2017-18, then I said, okay, it makes, you have this nice temporal differentiation. 10 years of looking at sanitation, different programs, but maybe at the same places. So I co-wrote this book with Sunetra called Memoir of Two Toilet Inspectors, pulling out all the notes that I had kept and basically reinterpreting them, updating, reinterpreting. So what I found was that it remained an add-on at the implementation level. Initially, it was tagged on to water supply. Then it became tagged on to water supply, health, education, and women and child development. And it was run in mission mode, unlike other government programs, say, for example, health or education or those kind of large welfare schemes that the government runs. And the human resources were always conscripted from other government departments, or they were short-term hires. They were consultants, or they were basically consultants, or they were given by a donor agency. They were positioned in the government from a donor agency. And the other thing that prompted me to co-write this book was the simultaneous existence of many missions over the last 10, 15 years at the same location. So, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, I first visited it in 2007, and this particular village had got a Nirmal Gram Puraskar, I think one of the first 40 to get that award, because it had eliminated open defecation. So I spoke to the sarpanch, I met village motivators, I met women, men, children, school teachers, the usual suspects who work on sanitation. And all the houses, during their transect walk, they all had the squat gray 1 meter square cement toilet. Then by chance, about 10 years later, I went back to the same place, and lo and behold, it was the same sarpanch. I think he had been re-elected a few times. But the Swachhagrahis, as they were called now, were different. They were paid on a daily basis for the number of days they were working. And there were more squat toilets. So I saw this in many states, in Bengal, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and some other states. I did not, I think, I visited Bihar only in the last, in 2017-18. So I did not have a comparison with what had happened earlier. And it was like sanitation's avatars had visited the same villages over the years. And so some villages had done really well and had actually managed to consolidate, but others were completely left out. So when we were writing the book, I sort of tried to figure out what is it that could be done differently and break this cycle of build, neglect, rebuild. And when I was in WaterAid, we used to debate this and try and figure out what is it that the sanitation sector is missing to be able to actually make an enduring difference. An international expert, I think, coined this term, build, neglect, rebuild. I forget who it was. But maybe the answer lay in other government programs like the health and the education sector. And they both had some success in raising literacy and health levels. So maybe the sanitation sector could borrow some things from them. Like, for example, having dedicated human resources, like having teachers or health workers, dedicated sanitation promoters, workers. So Swachhagrahis, instead of coming in and out, could become the dedicated human resource. Clear budget lines, consistent monitoring, and then, of course, coordination, which everybody talks about, but nobody does really with other government departments. But also I felt that, and where sanitation seemed to work better, it was where it had been made into an aspirational thing. Toilets were aspirational, not just for better health, not just for safety, but where it was where toilets were aspirational, well made, a pleasure to use, for example. I think that sort of seemed to resonate in terms of like education is aspirational, better health is aspirational. So yeah, I mean, those were some of the thoughts that I tried to put down in the book.
And you think that now, over the years, a toilet has a different image as something aspirational? Has that changed in the bigger picture in India? Or is it
I
something
think
that
in
we
some
should work
places,
for?
I think it needs a lot of work still. In some places, of course, it has changed. And I think it could be utilitarian, like Eklavya was pointing out. When you, in an emergency, you need a toilet which you can use. But also when there is no emergency, I think in some places where people have made the switch in their minds, toilets have been aspirational, but I think we still have a long way to go to really make that last kind of flip that last switch.
Okay, thank you, Nitya. Next on our list would be Vishwanath, and then Sunitra will give her perspective, and then we'll see from the audience. Prakash, if it's Prakash Kumar that I'm seeing there, then be prepared. I'd love to hear from you, if you look back over a long period of time, how you see the Ecosan movement. But first now, Vishwanath. Let's first Vishwanath, and then we'll come to you later.
Sure. Thanks. And it's been always educative to listen to fellow travelers of the bogie, which is sanitation. And I mean the railway bogie, not the devil bogie. For me, it's been always also a personal journey in the sense I'm a civil engineer by training, and I use a urine diverting dry toilet on my terrace even now after about 21 years of continuing to practice what one preaches. So that's been very interesting to see how technologies are imagined in the space of the technocrats, as Deepinder was mentioning, in terms of the technical solutions. What was fascinating as a civil engineer was the introduction of the steeply sloping pan, which said that you needed only 1.5 liters of water to flush. The P-trap, which needed only a 2 mm water seal, which meant that you would avoid the smells, but again, you would need a lot less water. The twin leach pit, which was sort of invented or discovered possibly in India itself, and became such an interesting model of trying to understand how waste could be disposed of in the proper context, not in the context of Bihar or floodplain areas or rocky areas, but in normal areas where you had the space. It seemed to give a very good solution to a big challenge, maybe 70% of the places and all that. So technology was fascinating for me to see how sanitation could reach more people. But I'll talk a little bit more on the urban areas because that's been my focus where I've been working with. I was working with the Housing and Urban Development Corporation, and we had a program called the Integrated Development of Small and Medium Towns in India. Maybe Deepinder will remember, it was called IDSMT. It was trying to reach out to these small towns. And there was a program called the Integrated Program on Low-Cost Sanitation, IPLCS, which was the equivalent of the Swacch Bharat, but for small and medium towns. And there, I was lucky to be participating in a funding program where in Karnataka state, 54 towns were supposed to receive the benefit of a loan and a grant to build toilets for themselves. And quickly it went into the government corruption trap. And we don't use the corruption word so easily, but I was witness to that, where the director of the municipal administration bought 2 lakh pans, virtually 200,000 pans, and placed them in these 54 towns. So when I went for inspection, the chief officer would be sitting on his chair in his room, and behind him, there would be something like 2,000 pans. And he didn't know what to do because this was dumped on him by the state capital, Bangalore. And he was supposed to get them built and then used by people. And there was no solution to this sort of large-scale imagination of how toilets were to be delivered. And it was an out-and-out disaster. Let's say it was 100% disaster. So that you were very efficient in designing something which completely did not work, and the state simply did not care whether it worked or not. So that was sort of an introduction, and one was puzzled as to what the solution could be. The second set of interventions which are now coming on board was the imagination of one of the largest philanthropers of a reinvented toilet. This golden throne which would solve the problem of the world by you crafting on it, and then it would turn to gold or energy or water or whatever it is, and you could drink it, and it would all be done for what, 50 cents or something of that sort. And even the best of monies after 10 years of investment seem not to have moved an inch, right? It doesn't seem to have rolled itself on the ground. So these imaginations of philanthropies and do-good organizations on how they want to change the sanitation sector. One is the imagination of the state, the government, which is riddled with bureaucracy and corruption. The other is the philanthropies and the NGO sector by their own worldviews, romantic or otherwise, in trying to find solutions. The third aspect of sanitation seemed to me, at least in the cities, the standards method. So you have a manual on sanitation, which the CPHEO has, that has to be delivered on the ground. And that is only deliverable if it's a waterborne system, and when it can reach sewage treatment plants, and then it can build itself. And there, the dialogue and conversations were on decentralized sewage treatment plants, which was again coming from the Lombard's DWAT system, but then decentralization was the buzzword. So my city, Bangalore, now has 3,600 broadly dysfunctional decentralized sewage treatment plants, and we don't know what to do with it. So our inability to revisit what we champion and then to course correct is puzzling to me, and I don't have answers to many of these questions. But aspirationally on the ground, as Nitya was mentioning, at least in the urban areas, it's clear that everybody wants a good pour flush toilet. They don't want anything else. They want to be connected to the sewerage network, and it's the grey infrastructure which is the call of the people. However, again, as Dipinder will keep pointing out, we will talk about blue-green. That's the buzzword. And then we'll talk about circular economies. We'll talk about closing the loop and things which are not really on the priority or the radar of people who really just want a toilet, which is functional, and be done with it. So this is the sort of conundrum and paradox one faces. And I'm now consistently of the view that we need to realize that decentralization is what the state should do, that we should have smaller sewage treatment plants, but run by the state, not by small apartments or small gated communities, but by the state itself taking responsibility and running it at a watershed scale, perhaps 2 million liters per day or 15 million liters per day. But it should be the state's responsibility because sanitation is a human right? And so that focus is lost when the state abdicates its responsibility and gives it off, saying you do the decentralization, you fix your problem. We will not step into this realm, right? So that's something fascinating for me. The last item that I wanted to discuss is, here is the imagination of a city like Bangalore, where it sees itself as a water and fertilizer factory, where all the wastewater that's being generated is going to be treated in sewage treatment plants, or so that's the dream, and be shipped out to fill 500 lakes or 600 lakes in the surrounding dry climate change affected countryside, fill the lakes to provide farmers with water security. In turn, the city will get food security because whatever the farmers produce will come back to the city. But that's being challenged by the standards that we are setting for treatment, which is essentially coming from the NGT, which wants to strip all nutrients from treated wastewater because they don't have a fit for purpose treatment system. So how do we grapple with these institutional imaginations of what sanitation is, of what wastewater is, and how we are incapable still of creating institutions which talk to each other? For example, the sanitation system in a metropolis could talk to the irrigation and agriculture department very productively and very synergistically. But these talks institutionally simply don't seem to happen. How do we create those platforms where they will happen and we'll set common objectives is something that that is interesting and puzzling to me. And the last point that I want to end with before I spend 500 rupees to Sunitra is that one of the first PhDs that we created when I was in Argyam was a girl called Sridevi who did her PhD on the reuse of urine as a fertilizer. And it was called anthropogenic liquid waste. It couldn't be called urine because it was not academic enough to be used for a PhD. It was called ALW. And she did her PhD. And it was remarkable that a girl could put her mind and heart to such an issue and come out with stunning results, saying that it's a damn good nutrient. So I end with the fact that we still work on standards and regulations, and we don't pay enough attention to the sanitation safety plan of the WHO, which is a risk-based approach and which then is multidisciplinary and which will provide the ladder by which we will reach the ultimate goal of every citizen in India having good sanitation services and India being pollution free. So it's a fascinating journey. I'm glad to be part of it and to be starting to work towards that particular goal myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishwanath. Okay, so CPHEO standards, what's not in the standards, it's not allowed to build. Water treatment fit for the next purpose, and the WHO sanitation safety plans. We're back then to that we have to allow for more, I don't know, research-based flexibility so that we can really have innovation in the country, which is going in the right direction. Maybe that's what I take from this one, and I'm curious about the girl's PhD, what actually happened after the years with it, but maybe we come to that in the discussion. First, I'll hand it over to Sunitra. What's your journey? What's your thoughts and contributions?
Thanks, Arne. Vishwanath left us about, talking about a platform where different departments can speak. My journey started in such a platform back in 2008, which was the Solution Exchange Water Community of Practice, which was a knowledge community where people shared ideas and knowledge and undertook small research work to mutually work on water sanitation problems back then. Since then, I've been working in the water and sanitation sector with different organizations, UNICEF, SME, and such, and I've keenly documented changes as I've seen in different parts of India, particularly with a focus on, as Dipinder mentioned, where is equity and justice in WASH? And that's been my particular focus in terms of, when I looked at WASH projects and sanitation projects to see, where is gender, where is disability, where is social inclusion? Where does this fit? Or does it fit at all into the scheme of things as far as sanitation is concerned? And traveling for the book that Nitya mentioned, a memoir of 2 toilet inspectors, because that's pretty much what we were doing. We were literally walking around as toilet inspectors and documenting what we saw in the villages. It was very visible to me as to how social hierarchies shaped access to water and sanitation and aggravated inequalities for women, particularly from lower castes and those living with disabilities. In India, as we know, women, we account for about 48.5% of the population, and persons with disability form 2.1% of the population. So that's a big percentage of people we're talking about. And within this population, of course, a combination of factors such as poverty, age, religion, caste, class, ethnicity, all of those, impact the nature of exclusion that are faced by women and girls and women with disabilities and people living with disabilities, and in the context of WASH. Caste, of course, throughout our travels, we could visibly see that it was a significant factor in determining, access to WASH services across the states that we had visited. Women from the SC and OBC communities were often, relegated to the most unsanitary living conditions. Unfortunately, no surprise there, really. And their exclusion from community water sources and sanitation facilities was, of course, a stark reminder of the discrimination that persists in Indian society and still does. And the caste system, which, of course, is deeply rooted in notions of purity and pollution, continued to influence access to resources, further marginalizing the so-called lower caste women. However, having said that, at a time when, many national and international media reports are talking about the atrocities committed against women, the stories of women's leadership in development and in sanitation and water remains an ignored story oftentimes. We were witness to seeing, as we were pitching headlong into making toilets under SBM, in several states, we witnessed heartwarming stories, really, of women leading campaigns for better lives in their panchayats against many, many odds. And a small percentage of these 7 lakh odd villages that have rid themselves of open defecation can certainly be attributed to the efforts of these women and others involved as well. But under leadership, many of these women who, as block development officers, sarpanch, jalbandus, SHG members, they demonstrated sanitation improvements where that they were possible, utilizing local resources and strategies. Of course, complementing their efforts and helping them succeed was a very responsive district administration. The district collectors, chief executive engineers showed how to engage with and provide space for women to feel more comfortable while making their case. And as I traveled across many of these states to research the book, in several district offices, I saw groups of women sarpanchs walking in with their demands and grievances. Women would wait outside these offices and were always called in separately, and they were no less vocal in their meetings. What was heartening, even in states like Rajasthan and Western UP, where women mostly cover their faces, some of these outspoken women had no hesitation in speaking up in front of men. I remember Mamata Chaudhary was then the Pradhan of Dharmapur Panchayat in Bijnor. When asked, she was saying, if we were to cover our faces, how do we expect, the officials to take us seriously? And to me, that really summed up very nicely how some women sarpanchs and pradhans had come out, so to say, and showed the way to so many other women on how to become a leader. However, I think, if we are to ensure sustainable and equitable WASH outcomes, we need to go beyond just inclusion in WASH activities and services and see, how we can be more transformative in our approaches. And this will require addressing fundamental barriers to gender, to disability, and to social inclusion. And as WASH practitioners, I think we need to identify what these transformative approaches could possibly look like in an ever-changing climate. Policies aimed at improving WASH infrastructure need to take into account the intersection of gender, disability, caste, and class to ensure that the most marginalized are not left behind. Women, particularly from marginalized communities, women with disabilities, people living with disabilities face multiple layers of disadvantages, as we can imagine. These disadvantages which affect their health, their safety, and overall well-being. So an intersectional approach is to me is essential to addressing these disparities and ensuring that WASH interventions are inclusive and equitable. And only through inclusive approaches can we hope to achieve SDG 5 on gender and SDG 6 and ensure that no one is left behind. I will leave it at that for now before I think it's Arne's turn to charge $500. I think we're all going back home, 500 rupees richer and poor at the same time somehow. I'll pass it back to you, Arne.
I can't stop myself to ask one question directly. I think it would be wonderful to tell the stories of these women, support them, network them. I think that many would be very motivated to support such an initiative. But is that a thing, or do you think no, we need better policies, or is it strengthening those women champions? Would that be a great thing to do, or is there a downside to it as well?
No, there's absolutely no downside to championing women. We need champions. We need champions to demonstrate to other women that that this is possible, particularly in certain contexts, like I said, in Western UP, or even in parts of Rajasthan where women are still expected to cover their faces, are not expected to speak in elders, or you would see them in village meetings. I've been to village meetings where the woman is a sarpanch, but her husband speaks because she's a woman and she can't speak, although she's a sarpanch, So there are those stories, but then there are stories of women who rise to the occasion and make room for other women. So where ensuring women's leadership is acknowledged and showcased, I think there are also other intersectionalities that need to be addressed. It's not just women; it's women with disabilities. It's the disabled people. It's socially excluded groups. It's the hard-to-reach communities. It's communities like Eklavya was mentioning, the flood-prone areas. And I'm from the Northeast myself, and I'm witness to the floods of Assam every single year. Every single year, thousands of crores literally down the drain. Down the flood. It's build, repeat, build, and keep building some more in an unfortunately thoughtless manner, if I may say so. So yeah, policy interventions as well.
Thank you, Sunitra. Yeah, and I think we'll open it a bit, and definitely Prakash. I don't know, it's years that we have talked and met, and it's great you're on this call, and yes, I know some. Maybe 10 years, 15 years back, you were counting UDD toilets I mean, maybe that's long back for you as well, but maybe
Yes.
you can share your story. And as well, if you look back, how you think about that time and what came out of it. Floors
Yes.
is you, Prakash.
Yeah. Wonderful to connect with Arne, Vishwanath, Dipender, Nitya, Sunetra, Eklavya, and Ina. Good. So yes, before starting, my journey with the sanitation start in 1986 with Ganga Action Plan. And that was my first project after doing engineering in civil. And in Ganga Action Plan, the first job was that how we can stop some of the sewer line directly falling into Ganga. So that was my first exposure to overall this sanitation and all that. After that, in various capacities, in last 40 years, I was involved with sanitation, urban, rural, and with alternative sanitation, UDDT, and all that. So I'm just taking a little back. In 1977, there was a program called Accelerated Rural Water Supply Scheme. It was funded by World Bank, and the main purpose of that project was that how in the rural area we can provide potable water supply, drinking water to the rural community. And in that program, and if you see closely, for each panchayat, they have also given some 15, 20 toilets per household, per panchayats per village. And the panchayat head and the district administration, they choose and they give the subsidy to the particular household. During that time, those subsidy used to go to the affluent household in the village. So for the last from 1977 to 1984, this was the scheme. But in 1984, the government felt that we need a separate sanitation policy, and then the Central Rural Sanitation Program (CRSP) comes. Again, there was the focus has shifted from little bit from the water to sanitation, and it was again supply driven. Number was little bit increased with the government resources, and that time they have provided the twin pit design of Sulabh Shauchalaya. Bindeswar Pathak design of twin pit was part of the CRSP in 1984, and the number has gone little bit higher. At that time, if I am correct, the rural sanitation coverage was 1% in India in 1984 when the CRSP comes. So again, it was a supply-driven approach. But the real break actually in the sanitation came in 1999 with the total sanitation campaign. When in TSC, there was a much focus on awareness, media, publicity, and how we can link water supply, sanitation, and all that. So I still, worked with all of you. I still feel that, and in 1999 total sanitation campaign, there was a lot of thrust was given on the alternative sanitation, climate friendly sanitation, environmental sanitation. And in fact, that was the opportunity. I used to say to Arne, I just still remember that it's a blessing in disguise that India has 80% population going into the open defecation. And now we can build up a system by passing the water-based sanitation to the something environmental friendly sanitation. So that was the perfect platform that TSC has given to us. And I remember for the last 10 years, the knowledge bank of sanitation in India during the TSC was tremendous, different type of thoughts. And fortunately, Santa Sila Nair was the secretary. She was ready to hear out, different ideas into the sanitation, how we can. And that was the golden period when urine diversion, dehydration toilet, alternative sanitation, composted, and many things have been piloted in India. Yes, After that, there was Nirmal Bharat. Then again, it is a name has changed, SBM. Lot of resources, lot of financial muscle has been given to this program. So the painful part, what I have learned that in total sanitation campaign in 1999, there was a focus that let's not make the sanitation supply driven. Let's have a demand driven part. So that was completely missing after SBM. It was a lot of numbers was there. Everything was number which was being monitored in 90s. That how many toilets you have constructed? What is the number? Why you're not building that? So those voice, third voice that requires for equality, disadvantaged people, that has gone with the 2024 from last 10 years. Yes, we have huge numbers. Everywhere we have huge numbers. But I have not seen in last 10 years any different type of, sanitation, any different type of alternative sanitation anywhere, neither in urban area, not in rural area, So the entire program has switched back to the supply side. That was the very painful part of this. And during the total sanitation campaign, we were talking about the environment part. We are talking about the so let's make the climate resilient sanitation system. So now if I go back, then I'm seeing that I've just visited 10 or 15 villages in Jharkhand, Bihar, and West Bengal also. So with this supply-driven approach, with this traditional, focus on the sanitation, with the traditional design, we have put a big burden on the panchayats. I am seeing the huge liquid waste management issues coming into the villages, solid waste management issues coming, and now nobody is thinking about that. So what is going to happen in next 5-10 years? These liquid waste and solid waste is going to create a bigger problem than the open defecation that we faced in 90s. So that is very painful to see that now there is no thought on those things. Still number is being counted, and what Deepinder has said and Vishwanath has mentioned, aspiration has gone to the village level. Now they don't want the pit toilets. Now they want this the sewer system. There is in a 6 feet pathway. Evacuation is difficult. So now we are creating the entire village and panchayat something like a sitting on a seat bomb. And it is going to explode in another 5 to 10 years. And there is no plan, no preparedness from government. There was, if you see that in last 10 years, and I also mentioned, Vishwanath has mentioned that reinventing the toilet in 2014 was also a big blow to the new, resource-oriented sanitation. Now people have started looking for bigger solution, technological solution for this problem. So that has, put us back to the, where we have started. I still remember in 2014 when I was submitting the, UNICEF wanted that what has been done into the Ecosan. So we did a lot of things in ecological sanitation during 2008 to 2012. But now there are some islands still in Tamil Nadu, in Tiruchirappalli, and some, heroes like Subburaman and all that. Those are the places only where it is there, and Eklavya is leading that in West Champaran for the flood affected area. So that is very painful part of this entire sanitation journey, which I was part for the last 4 decades.
Thank you, Prakash. Thank you so much. And I was thinking that, okay, now we'll switch on what are the challenges of the future, and you just named one sort of that, and if I heard it right, sort of that aspiration is to have flush toilets in the village, and already now with the more water availability in the village, we'll have more gray water, we'll have more wastewater, we'll have more liquid waste, and that actually is well, that new problems are coming up with the higher availability of water. So that's going towards what's happening. I'll ask, we're just few people. So is there anybody else beyond Prakash in the group, in the chat, who wants to speak up and share a few words with us? Otherwise, I'll make sort of a second round on looking into the future. Where are we and what are the challenges today? I don't know, Marina, Amita, Johannes, Ina, any few words from you? There's no pressure. Okay, if you feel like coming in, do. And I think we have 25 minutes to go. Let's think of it. We've heard what was, and let's think about where do we stand and what's the challenge, what's the most urgent one, or the most effective one, or the doable one to be addressed. And I would give it a second round. I'll just look into my list, and it's not 5 minutes each, but we'll just stop otherwise if we have at the end of time. Personally, if I look into, there's a lot of change in the discourse, but there's not too much change on the ground. That's what if I look back the last 30 years, now sort of to talk about the sanitation chain came into being. The term washes, I think, started from 2006. Sustainable sanitation is from 2008. So there's a number of new words and new thinking and new things in the discourse. There's limited change on the ground. That's sort of my very personal one. And but what are the things to be addressed? And Alexandra has written in the chat about the shit flow diagram, but we can go there, but it's not that we have to go there. Deepinder, maybe what's the need, the urgent thing? And Prakash, I'll come back to you, but let's first speak to Deepinder.
I think a couple of things are, unique. It's not always trying to look for the new ones. But for example, why toilets are not being built? That still remains a question. Why FSM, desludging, is not happening? That still remains a question. So I think there are certain things which will be an issue, and we still need to, understand that. When we say caste and other gender are an issue, then what is the status? How is it changing? So I think that is very important. For example, we try to explore this fact that what is actually an aspirational toilet. And in a study for UNICEF, we did it in Bihar, we did it in tribal areas, we did it in caste areas. And we found that actually aspirational toilets, people are scared that it changes the status quo in Bihar caste villages.
Okay.
If we build toilets, hum bhadra log ho jayenge. And we will, challenge the status quo. Is that still relevant? How much of that has changed? We did this study in, I think, 2012-13, we did this. Similarly, in a tribal area, this is not an issue because it's not a mixed caste village. But there, the aspirations are low because incomes are low. And who wants to build a fancy toilet and, when your life is subsisting on 5,000 rupees a month? So I think there is a different, I think these issues remain. And as Vishwanath was saying, that we need to see what people want and then try to see what the government should do. Or the people can be convinced to do something else, but we need to address and identify that rather than imposing an NGO approach or a government approach, which we have criticized. But the NGO approach is also based on donor. If PMGF is there, everybody's talking of FSM. Now when they're leaving, nobody's talking of FSM. So, that approach, or decentralized sanitation. So I think that is the future, rightly pointed out by Vishwanath, and we need to identify what does it actually mean, rather than saying DWATS is decentralized and, shallow bores are decentralized and solid-free sewers are decentralized. We're still talking in a very techno-managerial approach. And that's the problem, even when we are talking of women champions. So women champions are not just for sanitation, please remember. So when we worked in Delhi slums, the women champions of Action India were taking all issues, not just water sanitation. Unfortunately, it is seen as, again, in a very techno-managerial approach that there'll be women champions for sanitation. The Basti women in the Delhi slums told us, no, this is just one issue for us. The other issue is about, homelessness or about police atrocities or about tenure. And we also take up this issue. Then this issue is strengthened, but we don't want to create a water and gender as a issue for the community separately. But that is the problem when it is seen as a techno-managerial thing. And therefore, it is important that what is decentralized sanitation systems, both I think in the rural and urban areas, if liquid waste management is emerging there, if solid waste management is emerging there, then we need to define what this is and get out of this techno-managerial separation of non-sewage sanitation, sewage sanitation. I mean, that completely ridiculous thing which happened when Bangalore was facing water crisis in April, when it was mentioned that perhaps non-sewage sanitation is an answer for Bangalore. So I think those kind of things we should get away from. Otherwise, we will, keep it becomes like a quagmire. We are constantly stuck in what we are speaking.
Okay. If I see it, we have about 15 minutes. So we're in the closing remarks arena of 2 minutes each or so. Prakash, in between your short contribution.
Yes.
Go ahead. You have raised your hand. That's why I expect that you want to.
Yes. So actually, one thing is that Deepinder has said, Vishwanath has mentioned, no, we are also mentioning this. What is happening now that we understand that for sanitation, water supply, for the scaling up, we need support from government organizations and government. So now, first thing is that again we have to convince them, about this alternative sanitation or decentralized wastewater treatment. That is going to be a very tedious job. If you go back 10 years back, things were quite different. At least people at those places, they were listening to you. Now it's very, very tough nut to crack. So my suggestion is that one has to again look out for ways and means how to convince them, give them sufficient evidence, little bit scalable, how it can be scalable. Otherwise, what is happening everywhere, it's no, we know that how it is going to done, we are going with this, that's all.
Okay.
So again, this is taking back us to in 1999. It took us a lot of time during those times for NGOs, even government partners, a lot of capacity building exercises, exposure visits to make them understand that country needs a different solution for different area, different classes. But that is not there. So my first thing is that, so right now we have to focus again to communicate with them, give them a credible evidence, data to support this, that this is the future of sanitation and this is going to value add. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. And as you remind me on Chanta Sheila Nair, she actually wanted to join. There are some technical issues, but I think it's safe to say that she's sending her regards, and maybe in another round we can have her included.
Yes.
Next in my list is Clavia. What's your summary or lookout?
It's quite challenging in the sense, I'm kind of summing up what Vishwanath, Deepinder, and Prakash just mentioned. You see, the point is that sanitation is not a uniform entity. And it is extremely important for us to recognize that. Sanitation, say for instance, in Western India, compared to sanitation in the Ganga, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin, that they're entirely two different concepts and even its execution. I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, this is kind of from the government report that almost 119 million people have been affected by floods from 2005 to 2024 in Bihar. Now, are we ready to accept the enormity of the problem? And here I bring in what Prakash just mentioned, that, now it seems very difficult to even list down what is it that is going to work. There is so much of apprehension and biases when you are interacting. You realize that because alternatives just do not, for them it is just a kind of islands that you create. It is not scalable. On the other hand, the practice or the technology which has been scalable is today kind of, it's dysfunctional in different ways. So my biggest challenge is, what is it that it'll take for us to define the problem? Make people realize that there is a problem. And if we do not attend or we do not discuss this problem, it is going to create further problems. Now, no one is talking about the impact. I think so. One of the speakers, they did touch upon it. No one is talking about the impact of the twin leach pit on the groundwater. On one hand, we are talking about tight water supply, but on the same side, we are also talking about that if the pipe water supply does not function, especially if you look at it in the flood-prone areas, then you go back to your hand pumps. Now, individual hand pumps draw water from the shallow aquifer. So it's very, I mean, once you just look into from a wash perspective, it's a very I hate to use the word, but it's again quite a complex issue, and I'm not seeing any progression or any kind of a positive thought going into it in order to address it. Last point, it's not about retrofitting. When we are talking about the floodplains in the entire GBM basin, just stop talking about retrofitting, because retrofitting is not going to give us a solution. It has to be dealt in a very different way. So these are some of the challenges. And the last is in terms of, it is time that we go back and see as to what exactly are the problems. We need to list it down. We need, because these are very, I mean, someone would say that it's just percentage of the entire country, but then that percentage does exist, and they do kind of, encounter problems. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Nitya, you go next.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll be very quick. I don't know in terms of what can be done, but some of the things that maybe we should stop doing. One is too much of focus on numbers. We have to cover the country. Therefore, we need to make 11 crore, 110 million toilets, and then they must be of a particular type. Why should they be of a certain type, and why do we need these enormous numbers of toilets? There was no justification. Okay, houses without toilets need toilets, but we can get there. Why set a 5-year time frame to make all these? And then you generate a lot of downstream issues as well, where we don't include people in planning. It's top down. So we say it's a demand-led approach, and it turns out to be just the same old supply-led approach. Because X number of houses don't have toilets. This is the time frame for the mission. Therefore, it needs to be done. And X number of toilets divided by the number of years. People get left out. But ultimately, who's supposed to use the toilets? So those are some of the issues that don't get talked about. Who is the worst affected by the lack of sanitation? So if we identify those people, then we know who to focus on. Maybe we can work out how to focus, because I'm sure there's plenty of examples around from other big programs that can help answer these questions. And then I think, yeah, Vishwanath did say that the twin leach pit is suitable for most of the areas, but then what can be used for the other areas? Putting it out in a manual or a or guidelines or something, that doesn't really help, because guidelines are sort of almost like written in stone for people at the implementation level. 12 leach pits, 12,000 subsidy. The leach pit size is to be this and that, and this is the kind of equipment. So it's almost like a checklist. But those are things that we need to really stop doing, because if you want to make sanitation anything beyond numbers, looking at aspiration, looking at inclusion, looking at uh, dealing with the second generation, third generation kind of issues that are coming up that Prakash talked about, there are a lot of things that we need to actually stop doing and start looking at it as a different creature now, maybe. And also, what is the aspiration? What is the role of social media, technology, all these things, the instant messaging age that we're living in? What is the role of all those in actually promoting meditation? Have we used those enough, other than to build networks of practitioners, networks of implementers? So yeah, I mean, just some more thoughts, I think, not really solutions here.
Yeah, and what I take from that is that if you say that don't look at numbers, what we heard several times as well in the last hour is that there are some cases where a community or a group of people takes up, or a family takes up and says, this is a good solution for me. And that helps you sort of to build on it and then make it bigger. But you need sort of this initial champions or group of people, or where sort of there's an understanding that responds to, and then maybe you can reach bigger numbers or grow in a certain slow or fast, but don't start with numbers only. That's what I'm taking from. That's how I understand what you said. Let me check. I think it's Vishwanath next. Vishwanath, you, and then Sunitra, and then we are done.
Yeah. So right. It's very quickly. What the startling puzzles for me as the paradox that CLTS, community-led total sanitation, and total sanitation campaign, or the Swacch Bharat Mission couldn't talk to each other. They would have been so effectively complementary to each other. It would have been demand driven, and then the supply could have helped the demand created to satisfy it in the sustainability, long-term sustainability thing. That we missed the boat on that has been, for me, a personal tragedy of sorts for the sanitation sector. Kamalkar and Robert Chambers putting out the CLTS agenda and the triggering approach, the approach of a full community thing was wonderful. And I think we do have the opportunity to revisit CLTS now that we've learned from the failures of SBM in many geographies, as Eklavya is pointing out, and in many contexts, as Sunitra is pointing out. So can we revisit CLTS, and SBM++ or +++ would be the challenge for us in one sector. I think the second sector challenge would be the urban sector. And in urban, I don't think we've cracked the non-sewer sanitation in any fashion. We've looked at FSTPs and FSM and regular desludging, but I think that's band-aid on chicken pox. It's only a short-term approach which will address certain issues but will not address the comprehensive issues. We'll have to move beyond FSTPs and FSM, and we'll have to think about what we call citywide inclusive sanitation, but which will have to include sewer sanitation. That aspiration is, that boat has left the harbor. Now you cannot go back in our cities and talk about anything else except sewer sanitation from an aspirational perspective and a functional perspective. How do we make that sustainable would be one of the key challenges. And there I would end my sort of future challenge by the fact that we have to create the right institutions in our cities. In our rural areas, we left it to the PDOs and the Gram Panchayats to be able to address it. And in many cases, it was not the Gram Panchayat, it was actually the state bureaucracy which was driving SBM. In our cities, we simply don't have the right institutions which will focus on land rights, housing rights, right to a planned city. Without a planned city, putting in place water and sanitation infrastructure is absolutely impossible. And those who are the most deprived are those who live on the margins, those who live on what you would call the illegal city itself. How do we address this illegality and still pursue the right to water and the right to sanitation, the right of, in my opinion, 24/7 water supply, and an individual private toilet in their home which can be used daily without them having to worry about the pits or the septic tanks or anything of it at all, especially women from the marginalized communities, to relieve them of the mental stress of having to manage water and sanitation together. Nothing could be more gender inclusive than piped water supply and good sanitation in the home. And the real barrier is a legal barrier. It's not a technical barrier. It's a barrier of our imagination. How do we overcome it with our institutions, and how do we create those right institutions would be the challenge in the future.
And how to provide sanitation and the household and has not to think about what's happening. Maybe could you give your thought on container-based sanitation? Will it be always a very small thing, or is there any, because that at least provides the service and sort of relieves the household of the service?
I think that ship has, again, it will be a small pilot. Pilots never fail, pilots never scale. It will be there at some particular point of time. I think we'll have to recognize that we will need sewage systems, and it's actually not so much resource intensive if we plan the whole water allocation positively. We will have to look at flush toilets and decentralized sewage treatment plants run by the state. That's my thinking now. I've moved away from Prakash's ideas and ideals.
But I think you're talking about the urban context, and I think it's different in the urban than in the rural context.
And we will be 60 to 70% urban in the next 20 years or 30 years. So urban will be the challenge, and the kind of health risks in urban areas because of bad sanitation will be far worse. And its impact on local water resources, the lakes that we have, the groundwater we have, the rivers and streams we have will be far worse unless we have a very well managed sanitation system, which actually picks up every gram of sewage, every milliliter of sewage. But I'm eating into Sunetra's time, and I don't want to do that gender injustice.
Yeah, but we're wonderful in time. It's okay, but the illegal parts of the city and then container, I could imagine, but I'm with you. It will be a small thing, but then to have sewers or decentralized systems in an illegal arena, I don't have the answer. But maybe Sunetra has. You have the closing words, sort of, Sunetra. We have 5 minutes to go, and I think that's it.
Thanks, Arne. Unfortunately, I do not have the answer. We're all, still working on water and sanitation because none of us have cracked the answers, or else we would be out of jobs. Fortunately, unfortunately, for me, the problem, as I see it, is whether it's in the urban context or in the rural context, it's addressing disparities and ensuring that wash interventions are inclusive and equitable. That remains a challenge, whether it's the urban context or the rural context. And for me, maybe it's time to look at a rights-based approach to disability inclusion and equity. No longer looking at and we've spoken about the supply-driven. It's no longer demand-driven. But what about a rights-based approach? And that's when there'll have to be a paradigm shift in thinking when you're thinking of rights of people and what are our rights as such. And to do that, perhaps an intersectional analysis, which engages communities with lived experiences and consider how people's multiple identities shape their privileges or their exclusions or marginalization. And when you look at all of those intersectionalities, we would probably have a better understanding of the problem and therefore a better, more nuanced solution for certain specific groups, be it in the urban context or the rural context. That's my two-bit in the interest of time, Arne, and the 500 rupees, of course.
We
in the interest of
on.
not having to shell out another $500.
I just have to add to Sunetra, just one sentence. Sunetra, when we talk about the rights-based approach, which is absolutely the way it is, I would still think that the right to land, the right to a place in the city, and the right to housing would form the basis of the right to water and sanitation. And without those preceding rights in the city, it would be very difficult for sanitation to solve the problem of access and universal connections to people.
Mm-hmm. Good, very logical. I think we wanted to reflect prior to World Toilet Day a bit without sort of a very set agenda, without a very clear, this is what it has to be. And to me, thank you so much, everybody. That's what we did. Yeah, I think here we are. And thanks for the initiative that came from Deepinder and Vishwanath, and for all others to join in. And I think Deepinder, yes, there's something we all can, please.
And just one line, 2 days back, there was a discussion with IIT Bombay scholars and on the urban sanitation, non-sewage sanitation systems. And they were saying that, well, small towns will not have the money and therefore non-sewage sanitation will be required. Maybe that is possible, one way to go about it. But the second point which came out in that discussion was very nice, that let's get out of this fetish of city-wide inclusive sanitation. I mean, this is where Vishwanath is also coming in, that let the future program or mission be focused on the so-called hotspots which we identified in the city sanitation planning. That decentralized sanitation systems for an equity and inclusive urban sanitation. And CPHU persons were sitting in the meeting about 2 days back, and I told them, this is what you should be looking at, rather than just another buzzword of city-wide inclusive sanitation means FSM, or means sewerage. So I think that is also very important, that they, somewhere when the government does it, as Nitya was saying, they end up doing it in terms of programs and projects which are universal and, so I think, I don't know if institutional restructuring can be done, as Vishwanath is saying, is required, but at least the challenges we should put up, and from our side, we should put up what needs to be done. That is, I think, as researchers, as people in practice, we can do, and we should do. Otherwise, we can't do much, and frankly, we can't change the way things are. We can only tell what is right and what is wrong. And this is where that Piers Blakey's book of, political economy of soil erosion in developing countries in the 90s, when we read it, when we were working in watershed development, I think that is very important in water and sanitation. What is required and what doesn't get implemented despite the best recommendations. So I think we should keep questioning and also suggest the way forward. Sorry, I took too long for this.
No, but that were the closing remarks now for this meeting. Thank you, everybody. I was very happy to be with you and to take the time to talk. And so hope you enjoyed it as well. For those who listened in, great you could make it, Prakash, after so many years. Great to hear your voice. And have a wonderful World Toilet Day, everybody. And let's go on and try to make things better. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.